Oh, brother, we're at it again. Yes, Kraven the Hunter. Honestly, I don't even really know why I'm doing a video on this. I mean, like, does anyone really care about the Sony Spider-Man spinoffs? They don't. You don't. I don't. And yet, I'm here talking about it because there's something sick inside of me that is fascinated with how bafflingly incompetent these movies are. Kraven the Hunter is out. It bombed at the box office. And I don't mean bombed, I mean bombed. And it's brought with its release the hand-in-hand finale of the live-action Sony Spider-Verse, or I guess the Sony Spider-Man spin-off. Just call it the Venomverse. I don't even know why this is a thing. A universe held together by the vague idea of a shared world inhabited by Spider-Man villains who are now anti-heroes. Anti-heroes who are now heroes, and heroes before they have their powers or abilities. It's like I've always said, wouldn't it be cool to have a backstory comic that blue balls the reader from cover to cover? Unfortunately, and surprising probably no one at this point, the Loose Universe's final installment fell in line with the rest of its predecessors. Kraven sucks. And it probably wound up being the worst of Sony's Spider-Man spin-offs to date. When Tom Hardy's Venom trilogy stands at the end of it all as the anthology's shining star. As a studio, you might want to take a second and regroup, right? Like, just reflect on everything you've done. And that's no shade on the Venom films. I love those movies, but they're this weird cosmic anomaly of they're not very good. And yet, in spite of all of that, they wind up being good because of the lead performance and the chemistry and the stuff that they accidentally fell into along the way and then doubled down on as they started making more of them. A fundamental misunderstanding of the character Sergei Kravenov, Kraven, reinterprets the world's best big game hunter into PETA's Captain America, enhanced with vague animal powers like the ability to zoom and enhance his own eyesight. You know, like how lions can do. I've always believed that a good movie should have you leaving the theater still discussing the film with friends. It should have you asking questions. So perhaps Kraven was a success after all. Following the tail end of its 2 hours and 7-minute runtime, my god, that felt like an eternity, I found myself asking questions like, what was the plot? And why were these characters even in it? What is going on here? It's disheartening at best to see the product of a fantastic team of creatives end up as a hodgepodge of scenes and themes threaded together by the most lenient definition of a plot I have seen in a film in some time. As a huge fan of director J.C. Chandor's previous works, Margin Call, A Most Violent Year, even Triple Frontier had stuff that I liked about it, and with an all-star cast including the likes of Aaron Taylor-Johnson, the man I wanted to be James Bond so bad, and now I'm left questioning whether or not I actually do want that. I do still, but we've got Ariana DeBose and Russell freaking Crowe. The last question this movie left me asking was, how does this happen? Does it start at the beginning with a subpar script? Is there even a finished script by the start of shooting? Is it a fundamental issue in the editing room that Sony refuses to correct? Or does it come from the top and trickle all the way down, seeping its misguided management into every facet of the movie-making process? Regardless of how it starts, it's had the same end result time and time again for the last 6 years. A batting average that should have Sony Entertainment and producer Avi Arad, that fucking little that man, asking a question of their own. What kind of a legacy are we trying to leave here? Do we care about the legacy we're trying to leave here? While Sony seems hell-bent on destroying the Spider-Man brand beyond the point of repair, you don't have to. Learn how to be more competent than the boobs running Sony Pictures with this video's sponsor, Brilliant. If you've seen any of our videos before, you've definitely heard me talk about Brilliant, and for good reason. I love them. They're my favorite platform for learning new skills because it's designed to tailor each and every user's experience specifically to what they would like to learn at the pace they want to learn it at. And yeah, Brilliant might not have classes on how to make a better cinematic universe than Sony, but I'm sure with their newly launched courses on collecting data, You'll wind up doing so, given the fact that these courses use real-world data to train you to see trends and make better informed decisions. Something that should be very straightforward for Sony Pictures, but they don't seem to understand how to do it. You're gonna be better than them, trust me. This content is perfect for learners of any level to start or continue learning data analysis with a fully built-out suite of new content from Bayes' theorem to multiple linear regression. Learn how to parse and visualize massive datasets to make them easier to interpret. Gain insight by working with real datasets from sources like Starbucks, X, Spotify, and more. Brilliant's courses are simple, straightforward, and easy to understand. Each course welcomes learners at every level and teaches you the specified skill set in engaging and interactive ways to help you learn the things you want to learn. Brilliant helps you build an understanding of the material from the ground up by closing every lesson with a hands-on problem to solve. It helps you not only to learn, but retain concepts by building your critical thinking skills through problem solving, not memorization. So whether you're as smart as Peter Parker or as clueless as the CEO of Sony, you'll feel right at home learning with Brilliant. Right now, you can try Brilliant for free for 30 days by visiting brilliant.org/filmspeak or by clicking the link in the description of this video. Give learning a trial run, as well as receiving 20% off an annual subscription. Again, that's brilliant.org/filmspeak or click the link in the description. Thank you so much to Brilliant for once again sponsoring this video. If you just bear with me for a second, I'm gonna take a step back and talk about this in the macro, this idea of legacy, because not only is it just kind of baffling when you think about what the legacy of these wretched films are going to be, but the film itself, Kraven the Hunter, talks a lot about legacy. What defines our legacy? Is it the good we've put into the world, the acts that we've purposely taken on in the name of altruism, or perhaps it's our mistakes, the memories embedded in the ones we've moved through life surrounded by that we never intended to be forever embroidered into our image? Throughout history, the prospect of our personal legacies, what we leave behind when we're gone, has been the driving factor in how we as humans sculpt our lives. After all, the way we think of ourselves only matters until we die. It's the ones that outlive us that carry on the person that we were. For some, it's as simple as providing monetary security for loved ones. For others, the prospect of being held dear in the hearts of many drives us towards the pursuit of fame. Or perhaps you want to be remembered as the guy who just, always had gum whenever someone needed it. I don't know. The pursuit of legacy is such an intrinsically human thing, and so it shouldn't be a surprise that many fictional characters also have that same ambition woven into the fabric of their DNA. In the words of Russell Crowe's Nikolai Kravenov,
"Men who kill legend becomes legend."
No, I know what you're thinking. What the fuck are we talking about with all this legacy stuff? This sounds like really high-minded and pretentious shit for something that is so undeserving of it. I promise we're gonna get there, don't worry, we're coming to it right now. Kraven the Hunter, as a character, has always been a man obsessed with legacy. Even during the early days as he was pursuing the wall crawler, Kraven's hunt came from a place of needing to prove himself and to the world that he was, in fact, history's best hunter, an apex predator greater than any that have come before. Having bested just about every other apex predator on Earth, Kraven turned his attention to hunting enhanced individuals. While Spider-Man has maintained his status of Kraven's ultimate prize over the years, the Hunter has gone after plenty of heroes and villains over the years, including the likes of Khazar, Beast, and even Old Man Logan. Although the character has gone through some drastic takes over the years, Kraven's focused and often arrogant goals have always come from a longing for a legacy fitting the image of the man he keeps in his own head. Even last year's version of Kraven the Hunter, who was the big bad in Insomniac's Spider-Man 2, had a clear mission statement: to leave the world stronger by weeding out the weak before death completed its own hunt. Sony's Kraven has concepts of legacy themes as well, but unfortunately throughout the film's runtime, that's how they remain, as mere concepts. Perhaps the strongest drive for legacy in the movie comes from Crowe's Nikolai Kravenov, a father who pushes his sons toward his own idea of strength in the hopes that, out of the two of them, at least one will become a stronger man than he, and thus a worthy successor to the family business. Drugs and, other mob stuff. strength and the misconceptions of what makes a person strong also show up as a possible idea that Kraven muses on, but just like Legacy, it seems more like a half-finished puzzle than a fully realized theme. Kraven's major problem lies in its inability to piece together said puzzle, having all of the necessary components in front of it to make a beautiful picture, but instead choosing to give up halfway through and leaving it to sit on the table. Many of the film's main players struggle with their own idea of what strength is, including all three Kravenoffs and the Rhino, the Rhino, with the addition of a tarot card that literally spells out this idea for the audience. I mean, it's simply shocking to me that the fantastic team behind this movie was unable to produce a specific message by the time the credits roll. Chandor and writer Richard Wank's take on the character was always going to be a hot one, conceptualizing the character as a sort of mashup between DC's hero Vixen and the CW's take on Oliver Queen. Wank's Kraven is essentially a rich kid who obtains animal-like abilities and chooses to use them to hunt down men like his father. While this take on the character is certainly interesting, I guess, I don't know if I'm down for an anti-hero Kraven. I'm kind of sick of the anti-hero trend, to be honest with you, at least for the moment, and it's mostly because of Sony's use of it as a crutch to tell subpar stories about villains that, guess what, aren't villains anymore, instead of actually doing the work to construct a compelling story about a villain. Sure, Venom is an anti-hero, I get it. Hell, maybe even Morbius if you really want to go in that direction, but the best thing about Kraven as a character is his villainy. He exists as the hubris of man over the natural world. He is a fucking psycho murderer and the comic book adaptation of General Zaroff from The Most Dangerous Game. Isn't that interesting enough on its own? I don't need to see him be this misunderstood vigilante. I mean, DC showed that you can take a villain and tell a character piece about why that guy is a villain and still find ways of making the villain somewhat sympathetic. He doesn't have to be a great person. I mean, shit, it's not like Arthur Fleck is this great guy in Joker, but you have a level of sympathy for him. You understand him to an extent, and it winds up being a compelling deconstruction of a villain. I'm not saying they needed to do the Joker with Kraven the Hunter, but it does show that people want to watch films about bad guys. They're interesting to us. And with someone like Kraven, it's all there. It's all in the text of the character. We don't need to jump through hoops to create this like trilogy of films that, eventually arrives him at the place that we wanted to see him at from the very beginning. That's stupid, in my opinion. Look, is there a way an anti-hero Kraven could have worked? Yeah, I guess. It's not really what I want out of Kraven the Hunter, but there's a concept there. At least if the film around it had been competent, I would have probably walked away somewhat amused, but as the film's poster hints, villains aren't born, they're built. And so, not even Sony wanted to fully commit to the anti-hero thing. The character was never intended to remain an anti-hero, and yet by the last shots, I'm left unsure as to how we're supposed to believe that the man sitting in front of the mirror and eye-fucking himself in his fancy new pelt vest is supposed to become the villain we've known over the years. As I mentioned earlier, I know that Chandor and Johnson were in talks about building a trilogy of films to arrive at the character's most iconic storyline, Kraven's Last Hunt, but why? That's like unnecessarily padding out something that doesn't need to be padded out. And in my humble opinion, that's kind of the crux of the issue here. I mean, outside of the insane filmmaking, the baffling just incompetence when it comes to that stuff, the core issue with the Kraven movie is that it's trying to be something that it's not. Here's the thing. You get one shot at a Kraven movie. Kraven, as a character, simply can't sustain a franchise. He can't. Because if you're going to have him sustain a franchise, then he's not Kraven the Hunter. He's just not that kind of character. The truth is, not every secondary character or villain has a body of work worthy of adapting. Sometimes, it's important to understand the limitations of the character and tell their most iconic story. You may never get another chance, so why wouldn't you want to take a shot at their most iconic story? I get wanting to build to it and, perhaps in a Spider-Man universe that features Kraven as a recurring character, you can make that work. but not in a trilogy that stands with Kraven as its main weight-bearing pillar. I'm gonna bring up the Spider-Man 2 PS5 game again. It's not like Kraven was this recurring character in the Spider-Man games prior to Spider-Man 2. No, quite the opposite. The whole point was that they realized that Kraven is most interesting when he's doing the Last Hunt storyline, and so they figured out a way to work him into that narrative. They took creative liberties in adapting Kraven's Last Hunt, but they still managed to adapt the core essence of that story and arrive at the same ending that they did for the character. It's adaptation 101. You can take liberties here and there, but Spider-Man 2 proves that you don't need to completely build up to this story. You can just go in there and figure out ways to make it compelling. And if you wanted to build up to Kraven's Last Hunt, I don't know, maybe you should have sprinkled in Kraven here and there. Maybe you should have included Spider-Man in your Spider-Man-less universe. Because, by the way, Sony could have included Spider-Man in any of these films and just completely chose not to. Anyways, that's a completely other tangent, but regardless. While there are interesting ideas in Kraven, they had to bend over backward to change the character so he had the potential to sustain a franchise, and it completely failed. Making him a sympathetic anti-hero instead of embracing him as the villain, ain't it? Audiences may have been willing to sit through 3, let's be honest here, mediocre Venom movies, but that doesn't mean they'll do the same for Kraven. Kraven doesn't have that weird alchemy of Tom Hardy acting against himself in the most gonzo way possible, and all this weird subtextual queer allegory going on underneath that is, that probably wasn't intended, but you know what, kind of became the face of the franchise, and good on Tom Hardy for recognizing that. Regardless, Kraven ain't Venom. People fucking love Venom, and they'll go watch anything that he's in. Kraven's an interesting character. He's a great Spider-Man villain. He just can't sustain a franchise on his own. But for the sake of perspective, let's look at it as a failed first movie in a trilogy instead of a standalone adventure. Even as a step towards villainy, it simply doesn't add up. If the point we're trying to get to here is arrogance and fallacy and the fact that Kraven alone serves as judge, jury, and executioner in determining the fate of his prey, maybe the error in that mindset should be more explicit. It's so muddled and just, I can't really make out the fact that he's supposed to be as bad as his father in this film. It also doesn't help that his targets are objectively awful people. I mean, we're talking about mobsters, poachers, murderers. Not once am I left questioning whether or not Kraven is making a moral judgment call because his victims have given up morality altogether. If exposing the vanity in Kraven's vigilante justice is the goal, well, maybe we should show Kraven losing himself to the hunt a bit, show that his vigilante justice is starting to become less about taking out bad people and more about the hunt itself. Even that word, vanity, is hardly attributable to Aaron Taylor Johnson's take on the character. Not once am I left questioning the ego of one of the most egotistical characters in all of comics. Hell, his father, Nikolai, played by Russell Crowe, feels more like the Kraven we all know and love more than the actual Kraven in this film. It's maddening. And if the point is that we're doing like an Ant-Man thing where it's like the original Hank Pym and then you've got the legacy character and Nikolai is actually the original Kraven the Hunter and this is, I don't know, the next generation, his father's constantly talking about strength and like not showing weakness and is this brute and he's ruthless. And it's just like he has this ego to him and this drive for a hunt. And why didn't you just put that into the Kraven we all know and want to see? It's baffling. Maybe show how Kraven is taking the most toxic traits from his father as he goes out into the world. I get it. Yeah, he's killing people, and so he's taken the murder gene from his father. But again, he's not even killing questionably bad people. He's killing like the worst people imaginable. He is the hero of this story. A vigilante, yes, and carrying out outlaw justice, if you will, but he's still the hero. In the end, we're left with what feels like multiple ideas of who this character could be mashed into one feature-length collage of ideas. And you know what? That will tend to happen when you go into filming with little more than a treatment, which I don't have any actual information as to whether or not that's what they did, but it certainly feels like there wasn't a finished script before the cameras started rolling. If there was a full script before shooting began, it certainly wasn't the one that made it across the finish line. With constant rewrites, it's no surprise to see every single actor behaving as if they're in completely different movies. Now, of course, rewrites happen, reshoots happen, retooling in the editing room happens from time to time. Sometimes it isn't until you're shooting that you realize a line or even an entire scene just doesn't work with the story you're trying to tell. Sometimes you realize that in the editing room too, hence why we get reshoots. But it truly feels like this entire script was in flux until the day post-production labeled a time of death on this hodgepodge of ideas and they had to basically call it a movie. It's so fucking insane, man. When Aaron Taylor-Johnson, Ariana DeBose, Alessandra Nivola, this entire cast really are meant to look like people who have no idea how to act, who have negative zero chemistry with everyone around them. It starts to just drive you mad because you have no idea how all of this talent could come together and create something that every moving piece of it is incongruent with what's come before. It's frustratingly formless, and not in a this is like avant-garde cinema kind of way. No, this is formless in just basic storytelling, in terms of basic filmmaking and competence. And JC Chandor, this man is an accomplished filmmaker. He's able to get good performances out of people. We've seen it. Just go watch A Most Violent Year. And yet, he comes into this, and they're talking about this film in interviews with the most confidence, with, the most passion imaginable. It's infectious even, and I'm starting to scratch my head and be like, did they think that they turned in a different film than what we got? I don't get it. How is no one able to walk away from this film unscathed outside of maybe Russell Crowe, who kind of understood the assignment and isn't really doing anything super egregious? He certainly talks about strength a lot, but it could be worse. He could be Aaron Taylor-Johnson saying that he's on a hunt back to back to back. That is his defining character trait, hunt. I get it, his name's Kraven the Hunter, but it's not even hunt in an interesting way. It's just he's gonna talk about being on a hunt. The main question I find myself asking after 6 years of Sony's unsubstantiated parading of their Marvel properties is, how does this happen? Look, making movies is hard. Making good movies is even harder. You need the right people from every department who know how to communicate their vision from one another in order to develop a unified product by the end of it. But how do we keep ending up with a movie that feels like 15 different pitches stitched together? How are A-list actors and directors made to look so incompetent that I'm left questioning their abilities as professionals? That shouldn't happen. As I said earlier, there's a clear direction in which JC Chandor and the rest of the creative team involved in Kraven wanted to take this character, wanted to take this film. We've got the pursuit of legacy, evident through Nikolai's search for a worthy successor, in Kraven's resistance in being the man his father is, the misconceptions of strength told through Rhino's, let's be honest, hideous transformation, Dimitri's ultimate decision to undergo the same procedure, and ultimately toxic masculinity as a byproduct of Nikolai's own misconception of what it means to be strong. This is all stuff you're gonna tackle when you're taking on a Kraven film. It's all there, it's baked into the text and subtext of this character. And although each of these themes were flimsy at best, at least I could sort of make out, if I squinted, what they were trying to do with the overall idea of Kraven. The real issue is that we've got some hollow protagonists here that not even the actors can infuse with a sense of life and charisma. Let's start with the obvious one, Calypso. It's a character who's practically only tied to her comic counterpart is her name. Calypso as a character makes sense to include in a movie about Kraven. I mean, in the comics, they're often tied together. In fact, it was Calypso's mystical tampering and constant antagonizing of Kraven's failure to kill Spider-Man that ultimately led to his, spoiler alert, suicide in Kraven's The Last Hunt. As a master in the mystic arts, she's forced to be reckoned with and a formidable foe for the old webheads. So how did we go from an incredibly strong, albeit evil sorceress to a lawyer whose only ties to mysticism are the potions left to her by her grandmother? Calypso devolves into a directionless passenger throughout the movie, a borderline NPC mouthpiece for exposition, used to gather information, snipe a guy with an arrow, and waste the only two keepsakes her grandmother left her on a dude she barely knows.
I knew you had more of that.
Well, forgive me for not trusting a lunatic with my family's deepest legacy.
I would assume you wouldn't, but alas, here we are. Calypso's legacy comes from her grandmother and the vague lineage of magic she comes from that's alluded to in her character's introduction. Throughout the film, she's trying to figure out where in the legacy of powerful sorcerers she stands, and then she just, doesn't figure it out. She's just kind of a lawyer there. I don't even know what kind of law firm she works at, or what it's just, she has clients that do bad things and she tries to defend them, and I don't really know why she's compelled to do that. I guess it's alluded to in the fact that she saves Kraven's life at the beginning of the film, that she sees sympathy in all people, but it's like, what are we doing here? As someone who has distanced herself from that part of her life since her childhood and found a grounded lifestyle, there's room for internal struggle for this character, but it sadly never shows. I mean, it's similar to what Kraven's going on, where she's trying to figure out how she wants to continue on her family legacy. She feels trapped by what's come before, she doesn't want to be that, and so she kind of charts her own path, but winds up falling into a roundabout way of following in the footsteps of her ancestors. Perhaps in a fully realized trilogy, we would have gotten somewhere along that line, but even in this movie, standing as the prospective first entry in that trio, I have no desire to learn about or grow with this character. And again, like Ariana DeBose, what are you doing? Like, it's just, this is an Academy Award winning actress. What is happening here? How is she? Ultimately, it can be pieced together that Calypso's involvement relies on a character we never get to meet, a colleague and friend who died trying to take down one of the world's largest suppliers of illegal firearms, Semyon Chorny. So it does make sense that she might want to be involved with Kraven's mission if the story revolved around pursuing Chorny, but Chorny is taken out in the first 15 minutes of the movie. Hell, if we had just combined both Chorny and Rhino's characters, we would have gotten a big bad that united both Calypso and Kraven against a common enemy. Instead, Kraven uses Chorny's assassination of a show of goodwill in his first, technically second meeting with Calypso in an attempt to utilize her contacts as a lawyer to help him track down other folks on his list. The problem is, it doesn't seem like Kraven has ever had a problem tracking down his hits in the past on his own.
Ja, охотник.
God, how many times did poor Aaron Taylor Johnson have to regurgitate that line? Anyways, so what need does he have for Calypso's contacts? There's a stronger choice to be made here by flipping the circumstances. If Calypso seeks out Kraven after the death of a friend in order to enlist the help of the hitman she inadvertently created years ago, she has much more of a drive as a character to want to stay involved in the overall mission. But instead, we're given an underbaked character whose wants and drives are vague at best. If by the end you're asking yourself, wait, what ended up happening with Calypso? I promise you, you're not alone. It should also be noted that the decades-long reunion between Calypso and Kraven is comically underwhelming at best and nonsensical at worst. Like, these characters don't react like this is the first time they're meeting in 20-some years and just go through the motions as if they've been working together for some time. What? Again, every performance is just not on the same page. It's insane. Next up is Dmitry Kravenov, aka the Chameleon. I love Fred Heshinger. I actually don't think he's terrible as the Chameleon in this film. I mean, it's kind of tough when you're trying to work within this, but like Kraven and Calypso, Dmitry makes his live-action debut in this movie, though his villain alter ego is only hinted at for like 98% of the plot. I will admit, I do like the idea of how they interpreted the chameleon in this film. Someone who's forced to become someone else because who they are isn't good enough to be accepted by other people, namely his own father. I will say, for most of the movie, Dimitri's character arc is probably the strongest of his fellow protagonists. A talented boy, successful in his own right, but never good enough in the eyes of his abusive father. It's a strong enough foundation to build a character off of. And yet, his full transformation into the chameleon doesn't really make sense. He never gives off, "I'm going to become the bad guy" at any point in the film. So the reveal that within the span of a year-long time jump, he just completely changed his goals in the wake of his father's death. The only person keeping him from being himself is dead, and he just says fuck it and becomes his father? It's frustrating, clearly, because he and Rhino shared a similar insecurity, both failing to feel comfortable or accepted in their own skin enough to construct a new identity to fortify themselves without addressing their reason for feeling that way, without addressing their insecurity. However, Dimitri was gonna kill Rhino at the end of this film, and Kraven saves him from doing so, from going down the same path that he's inadvertently gone down. His character is teed up to go in a completely different direction. Why the fuck does he then heel turn in the last few minutes of the movie? The only plausible reason is to give us comic-accurate chameleon and set up a sibling rivalry, both of which we'll never see play out in the sequel. It's just, for lack of a better term, so lame. It's just so lame. It fucking sucks, man. Like, stop trying to just, fuck. And then we have the main man, Sergei Kraven, who, he's not great in this film, as we've kind of been talking about. Sergei's character development sits at the bottom of a mossy, undisturbed pond until the sighting incident of his brother's kidnapping drives him into a focused action nearly halfway through the movie. Like, I have no idea where this thing is going for over half of its runtime, because it's this random little mission at the beginning, this very trite, contrived origin story a la Ben Affleck's Daredevil, and then eventually I guess they kind of figure out, oh hey, this thing has to have a plot. Until the halfway point, Kraven, as he's presented in this film, is nothing but a concept. Even this idea of Kraven going around and checking off names on his list feels very ill-defined. Like, what is this list? What are we doing? Is he just like some John Wick guy who wants vengeance? Because if so, that's never really made clear. I don't even know why he's going around and killing people, to be honest with you. Like, from the beginning, he's in prison, but oh no, it turns out that he's on his own little secret mission, but I don't really know what the point of that is. What are we... Again, it's just so nebulous here. Like, there was potential here to build the abusive yet clearly complicated relationship both Kraven and Dimitri had with their father, Nikolai. Like, there could have been something interesting about a father whose abuse is rooted in his iron view of masculinity, and although through his perspective he's trying to toughen his boys up and make them stronger than he himself is, or I guess as strong as he himself is, he ultimately tears his family apart. He doesn't take accountability for it either, because he's so tunnel visioned, he can't really see the collateral damage he's causing. It's clear that Nikolai does love his family, he loves his boys, and I think the birthday scene where we get all of them at the table kind of alludes to something a bit more interesting and deeper. It alludes to this complicated relationship the boys have with their father, where it's like he is their father. They do have good memories with him, but I mean, he kind of is the reason their mother's dead, and also he kind of ruined their lives in the process. I mean, he fortified them into these monsters that he's kind of unleashed onto the world inadvertently, but it is just, there's nuance here that we could have explored, and we don't get any of that. Nikolai's legacy in the eyes of his kids are the scars he leaves with them. The movie attempts to persuade us that their version of Kraven is a man trying to be nothing like his father, but in so doing, realizes how similar they both are, which would be a really strong decision if it didn't actively show him as a much better guy than his father, as nothing like his father. They're trying to make this connection where it's like the only through line, the only similarity is that they kill people. If the point is that our children make mistakes that, in a roundabout way, turn them into worse versions of ourselves without the proper guidance, then I should see and feel that, and I simply don't. I just see a bunch of pieces that are never properly assembled. I see a bunch of strands that never really attach. It's just that there's vague ideas here, stuff they want to do. Again, concepts of a plan, not an actual concrete plan of where they want to take these characters. Regardless of what happened here, and I'm going to be obsessing and thinking about what the fuck went wrong with this film for entirely too long. It's not deserving of my attention, but again, with all this talent involved, I can't help but just continue to pore over any piece of evidence that supports like one of the theories I have. Like, it just, oh my god. Regardless, all eyes turn to Sony and that goddamn Avi Arad, you bastard. I'm gonna say this again. No one sets out to make a bad movie. Even in the most rushed job of films, there are wonderful minds putting their best foot forward to make an enjoyable story with the tools they're given. That being said, it's hard to build a house when all you're handed is a screwdriver, right? Inversely, if you're given a full set of tools and a beautiful blueprint to go off of, but your contractor says, hey, it needs to be built by Monday, or the client pulls their funding, that beautiful blueprint is going to end up as a shadow of its potential design. The color, general shape, and necessary components to make a house stand might be there, but it's going to lack any semblance of nuance. What we've seen over the past 6 years from Sony and Avi Arad is a desperate attempt to maintain rights over a popular IP and nothing more. It's incredibly cynical, and yet despite that, these films are even worse than you can possibly imagine. Like, surely they would have to realize that at a certain point, audiences are going to stop showing up. They're gonna see you for the snake oil salesman that you are and say, no, you're not gonna get me this time. And clearly, Kraven was the straw that broke the camel's back. The only successful live-action Spider-Man films have come in the form of Tom Holland's Spider-Man, and guess what? It's because they're Spider-Man movies. But those were also sculpted with the guiding hand of an already established universe. Truthfully, it's a goddamn miracle that the Spider-Verse films exist, and not only exist, but exist in the way that they are, and were able to blossom so beautifully through the concrete foundation Sony has asked its creatives to plant their ideas in. My only guess would be that because it's animation, they were afforded the creative freedom to do whatever they want, because these are old school producers who don't see the value in animation, even though those films are clearly the only thing keeping them afloat right now. After announcing a week before its release that Kraven the Hunter would officially be the final movie in the Sony Spider Extended Universe, whatever the fuck that is, the spin-off universe, it just stupid name. Our only hope of a complete upheaval is that Sony lost enough money on their pitiful excuse of a shared universe that they finally are looking to give up the Wall Crawlers movie rights. At the very least, perhaps those that have steered this broken down car into a ditch time and time again will finally take their hands off the wheel and have a seat in the back, while those who care about the final product of the movies they're making are given complete control of the vehicle. And listen, Sony spin-offs, they haven't all been bad, right? Venom's action sequences and attempts at digging deeper into the zany relationship between the symbiote and its faithful host have been admirable, right? And it's mainly just because Tom Hardy was like the creative lead on these films and was making the movies that he more or less wanted to make after they figured out what worked. It's anchored by this incredibly charismatic performance. And the same can be said for Madam Web, right? It provided its own type of movie-going fun in the form of a so bad it's good time at the movies, thanks largely to the utter disdain Dakota Johnson had for the incoherent schlock surrounding her. She was equally as charismatic as a Tom Hardy, was on that same wavelength, and understood the dog shit that was going on. And she's so expressive, and she can't hide like her utter disgust as a performer, and that's what I love about her. And that's why Madam Web works, because of her. But again, a house built on memes cannot stand, especially when those memes are at the expense of the film. Sadly, Aaron Taylor Johnson is too committed to making this mess work that it backfires. He's almost blissfully unaware of the schlock he's in, and that ultimately causes the entire foundation of Kraven the Hunter to collapse. Once again, I'm left racking my brain trying to figure out how something like this happens with the cast and the crew we're presented with. How are none of the performers on the same page? How are multiple awards caliber actors made to look incompetent? Why does JC Chandor walk away from this project for the first time in his career looking like he has no clue how to direct a performance out of someone? How is there less than zero chemistry between any of the performances? How is every single piece of this monstrosity completely at odds with one another? I cannot make sense of it. It's unfortunate to waste such wonderful talent on this lackluster final installment in the saga of disappointments, and as it stands, when it comes to legacies, Sony should be concerned with their own. Despite its all-star lineup, Kraven the Hunter will ultimately be forgotten in the years to come, except hopefully as the movie that finally made Sony get its shit together.